Our next explanation for offending behaviour comes from the cognitive approach. So remember, what we're looking at here is how thought processes can influence behaviour. The cognitive approach is a more difficult one, so if you're still not sure about the principles of it, please go back to the screencast on the cognitive approach, have a look at that and just refresh your memory before you move on to this particular screencast. So 2 cognitive explanations that we're going to look at for offending behaviour. The first is the level of moral reasoning that a person is at, and the second one is hostile attribution bias. So levels of moral reasoning to start with then. This was a theory which was proposed by Kohlberg in 1969, and he suggested that everybody, when you're younger, you go through moral development in the same way you would go through physical or intellectual development. And he said that there were 3 stages to this development of moral reasoning. So the first stage he called pre-conventional morality, and this was focused around the self. So somebody at this level of morality would ask questions such as, will I be punished or will I be rewarded, in order to decide whether or not they should carry out a particular action. Now, as the moral reasoning develops and becomes more complex, he said we moved on to the conventional morality stage. So this was when we considered not just ourselves, but society as a whole. So instead of just thinking about reward and punishment, instead an individual at this stage would ask questions such as, what do people around me think? Is this illegal? And they would use those questions and those answers to determine whether or not they should carry out an action. Now, Kohlberg said the highest level of moral reasoning was known as post-conventional morality, and this was when you know your own mind. And this, at this stage of reasoning, you would ask questions such as, is it wrong in this case, and is the law unjust, in order to decide whether or not you would carry out a particular action. Now, using Kohlberg's theory, it would make sense to suggest that those people who are at the pre-conventional stage of morality, i.e. will I be rewarded for this, will I be punished by this, would be the most likely to commit crimes. And this is because they're not considering anyone else around them, they're not considering society, and they're not considering whether their actions are globally right or wrong. They're just thinking about themselves and whether or not they would likely to be punished or rewarded for carrying out that particular action. So it's people at this pre-conventional stage of morality that would be most likely to commit a crime. Our second cognitive explanation, the hostile attribution bias, is a cognitive distortion. So this is when thinking processes are muddled or distorted in some way. And in this particular case, it's when behaviour is interpreted in the worst possible way, and as a result, people are more likely to take offence at something that somebody does, and criminal acts are committed. So this could be if, for example, you see 2 people talking when you enter a room and they stop very suddenly. A hostile attribution bias might assume that those people must have been talking about you, and therefore you may be more inclined to behave towards them in an aggressive way than if you didn't have this hostile attribution bias. So you can get more information and more detail about both of those explanations from the pre-reading, including more detail on the stages of Kohlberg's levels of moral reasoning. But before you come into the lesson, make sure you can describe the 3 stages of moral development according to Kohlberg, explain how the stages of moral development link to offending behaviour, explain what's meant by hostile attribution bias, and also explain how a hostile attribution bias may lead to offending behaviour.